So, welcome everyone to our book publishing webinar. The Institute for Independent Journalists is a new organization empowering and supporting freelancers of color, and our mission is the emotional and financial sustainability of independent journalists. So, books, I know, are a huge piece of this for a lot of people. That's this big milestone we want in our career, and I know our panelists are going to do a great job of deciphering some of the mysteries, helping you find a path through all of the advice. And to guide us, I'm really, really grateful to have an accomplished moderator and audio journalist, Blanca Torres, who is a producer and reporter for KQED in San Francisco, mostly where she works on Forum, one of my favorite live daily news and analysis call-in shows on NPR. And before joining KQED in 2020, she spent 16 years as a reporter and columnist for many newspapers across the country, including the Baltimore Sun in my neighborhood, the Seattle Times, San Francisco Business Times, and she's a multiple award winner from different journalism organizations, and a lifetime member and former board member of the National Association of Hispanic Journalists. So thank you so much, Blanca, for being here, and take it away.
Hi, everyone. It's morning for me, so good morning, good afternoon for wherever you are streaming in from. I'm going to introduce our panel. We'll start with Sylvia A. Harvey, who goes by Saw. She's an award-winning journalist, speaker, and the author of The Shadow System, Mass Incarceration and the American Family. Saw's work on race, class, policy, and incarceration has appeared in The Nation, Elle, Politico, Vox, The Marshall Project, Color Lines, and many more. Her commentary on the criminal legal system has been featured in NPR, WBAI, HuffPost Live, Cheddar News, and others. Saw's work is being used in university coursework and has been cited by federal lawmakers calling for criminal justice reform. You can connect with her on social media at MissMS_SAH. So welcome, Saw. We're excited to hear about your journey. Next, we have Vanessa Waugh, who's the author of the national bestsellers A River of Stars and Forbidden City, as well as Deceit and Other Possibilities, which was a New York Times editor's pick. She's a National Endowment for the Arts Literature Fellow. She's also received the Rona Jaffe Foundation Award, the Asian American Award for Literature, and the Steinbeck Fellowship in Creative Writing. She's been honored by various journalism organizations and recently finished some time as a columnist for the San Francisco Chronicle. Her work has also appeared in the New York Times, the Washington Post, and the Atlantic. She's currently a visiting writer at St. Mary's College and has taught at the Warren Wilson MFA program, Swanee Writers Conference, and others. Welcome, Vanessa. So Jade Wong-Baxter joined Francis Golden Literary Agency in 2021. She previously worked for 3 years at Massey and McQuicklin Literary Agency as a junior agent and foreign rights associate. A graduate of Vassar College, she got her start in publishing at the Writers House, W.W. Norton, and Folio Literary Management. Her clients include Chris Belcher, author of Pretty Baby, Delia Kai, author of Central Places, and Hannah Matthews, author of You or Someone You Love. Jade is looking for adult literary upmarket fiction and narrative nonfiction with an emphasis on narratives by and about people of color, as well as perspectives of marginalized identities. Her other interest areas include magical realism, memoir, cultural criticism, and Asian American history. So our next agent is Ayesha Pande, who founded Ayesha Pande Literary in 2007. Before she became an agent, she worked in editorial, most recently as senior editor of Farrar, Straus, and Giroux. She's on the board of Art OMI and the Association of American Literary Agents, where she founded the Committee on Diversity, Equity, and Inclusion and helped launch the nonprofit Literary Agents of Change. Her current client roster includes Ibram X. Kendi, Patricia Engel, Danielle Evans, Matthew Salesis, and Lisa Coe. While her interests are wide-ranging, she works mostly on literary fiction, and narrative nonfiction, including history and cultural commentary, memoir, biography, and occasionally young adult fiction. She's drawn to distinctive voices with a compelling point of view and memorable characters. So, as you can see, we have a pretty wide range of experiences and expertise. So, we're really excited to just bring everyone's insights and really talk about how each of these very accomplished panelists, came to where they are today. So, we'll start with that, with just each of you sort of telling us how your journey was like getting into the publishing industry. So, let's start with Vanessa.
Hi, everyone. I'm really excited for the conversation today. Thank you, Blanca, for moderating, and to all of you for joining. So I was for years a daily news reporter at the San Francisco Chronicle. I covered a wide range of topics from tech to Asian American affairs, but I kind of always had the fiction writing on the side. I would utilize the newsroom printer to the max. Right at lunch, before work, took evening classes, joined writing groups, even one off of like Craigslist. I was younger then, and those were the times. But I was on a reporting fellowship just out of Korea, and I was just mentioning like, oh, I've always wanted to write a book. And one of the other fellows said, then write a book. And she was just making small talk, but it resonated with me. It made me realize I needed, if I truly wanted to write a book, if this is the dream that I've had since a kid, I needed to find a way to center it in my life. And for me, I decided, and I want to preface it by saying there's many different paths to writing a book, but I decided I would apply to an MFA program, a Master's of Fine Arts, and one that was more importantly fully funded. That some of them you pay out of pocket, others, through a combination of stipend, fellowships, and teaching experience or opportunities, then that covers it all. So I went to UC Riverside, and it was there that I worked on my first. I wrote a draft of my first novel draft. And it's kind of a convoluted story, but let's just say the first book I ever wrote was the third one I published. So so I had to write two other books before that first book came to being, Forbidden City, which came out last year. I'm happy to answer lots of questions, but as the conversation moves along, but just know that I've had a short story collection and two novels, and I'm now working on a nonfiction proposal. So I'm happy to share any of that experience as the panel unfolds.
Thank you. Yes, I mean, I am curious. You come from a journalism background, so why fiction for you specifically?
Oh, well, I always felt, as much as democracy dies in darkness, everyone subscribed to their local papers. Journalism, there's no better place to be in the world than when news is breaking than in a newsroom. But on the other hand, I just felt that there were stories that went beyond the official record that might not, ever get covered or considered. And I felt like it was a place where I could exercise my storytelling abilities. And I still love to do both, but I think it's important to have those spaces, especially say news is, people might think like there's a feeling of like, oh, I need to read the news. It's doom scrolling. It's just bad news. Whereas you can change the way people think and feel and act if it comes in sideways through fiction.
Yes, I understand that. Like, there's less pressure to get absolutely every fact right. So it's a big difference. So let's go to one of our agent panelists. How about Jade? Can you tell us about your journey into publishing?
Hi, yes. Hi, everyone. I'm really excited to be here today and to be on a panel with such a great range of people. I got my start in book publishing because I, like many people in book publishing, grew up loving books, loving reading, thinking I wanted to be a writer. And then I tried writing and I really, really hated it. But I found that in the course of writing, what I did love was giving other people feedback, working on the editing, and sort of being interested in the practicalities around bringing a book from, someone's Word document to actually being out in the world. So with that, I started interning at different agencies and different publishers, and I found myself drawn to the literary agency side because it felt to me, A, that it tends to be smaller companies, so the work culture is a little different, and B, as an agent, you have, at least to my mind, quite a bit more autonomy than you do as an editor. So I can sort of find what my obsessions are for that particular moment and really, really chase them. I can find what I think would be a good book idea and try to find a writer to match it. So yeah, with that in mind, I started as an assistant at another agency, Massey and McQuilkin. Much like the agency I'm at now, both places are fairly sort of boutique to moderate, and they both focus on fiction and nonfiction, but with a special emphasis, I think, on things that have a sort of social justice or a sociological angle to them, which I really liked. I started building my list at MMQ, and then I moved over to Francis Golden about 2 years ago to really continue to build my list, again, across fiction and nonfiction, and particularly to look at things that I felt were missing from the market, or to sort of fall in love with stories that had a really, really distinctive voice, and especially from people of color. So yeah, that's what the work I'm continuing to do, and that's how I ended up here.
And you mentioned that you were drawn to the literary side. Can you just describe what that means? That's an industry term, right?
Sure. Do you mean the literary agency side or the literary genre side?
Right. Well, I've heard that term, like, this book is very literary, as if other books are not. So, like, can you just describe what that means when people describe certain books as literary, for example, literary fiction?
Yeah, I wish there was a consensus across all of book publishing as to what that means. The way that I tend to define it is literary writing. I think of as being very sort of, very beautiful on a sort of line level, first of all, but really sort of driven in many ways by ideas or characters rather than being necessarily very plot driven right off of the bat, and often sort of marketed as such in the book publishing market. Does that help?
Yes. Yes. Thank you. So, Sa, we'll go to you. Tell us about your journey.
Hi, everyone. Thanks for tuning in. Let's see. I feel like nameless, but I was standing outside of, I feel like A-Rod's apartment or Madonna's, like waiting for the other person to come out with a toothbrush to prove that they were like dating. And I was like, there's no way I'm doing this kind of work. Like, there's just no way. So I feel like after that sort of daily news job, I was like, yeah, I want to do something that really allows me to dig deeper into stories that I think are important, that I think matter, that I don't think are always sort of told in a way that is robust and honest. So yeah, I've always thought, how do I tell these stories of, how do I take the story of a Black teenager convicted of triple homicide, during a drug dispute, a white mother that lost the custody of her two children because she, served 17 days in jail, right? The 80-year-old woman that's denied parole and told to come back in 5 years when she's 85, right? So really being able to look at all these kinds of stories and look at them beyond this idea of them being personal tragedies, right? Like, what is the sort of story behind the story? How do you look at a person in a multidimensional way and not just look at them as a multidimensional sort of being, but also look at how race and class and policy all this stuff really impacts what's happening, right? So we're going to look at the school to prison pipeline to figure out this Black teenager, his first arrest was at school when he was 12 for throwing a rock, right? Like, what does that mean? What does that look like? So I really just, had the opportunity to pull back the layers and just go deep. I've always wanted to know the answers, right? So it's not enough to just say, hey, this person is convicted of murder, they're going to be in prison for the rest of their life. I want to know everything. And I think that readers are sort of more moved when they know the story behind the story, right? So, it's really just been, that's been the journey, right? Like telling those big stories in magazine form and, having someone then say, hey, this should be a book, right? And I'm like, yeah, that makes sense. That makes a lot of sense because there's so many stories to tell. And there's just not enough space in that 5,000 word magazine piece. So yeah, I'd say that's how I got here.
Thank you. And so when you say you had an opportunity to tell those stories, was that because you were working at a publication that was publishing those stories, or how did that part happen?
That's a really great question because as I mentioned, sort of being this free spirit, I've never, aside from the stringer position, never worked in a newsroom. Like I just couldn't do it. It just didn't make sense for my life. So the way I even got into doing these big magazine pieces was through fellowships, right? I was at the Nation Institute and I got a fellowship to do one big investigation, right? And then selling that investigation to a magazine and doing so well with that. Actually, the first sort of long form piece I did, I got a really big award for it from the National Association of Black Journalists. So it was like, hey, your first time out, like you've got this award for this really important piece. So let's do more, right? So I got the first grant and then I got another one and another one and another one. So I just kept going. So yeah, fellowships were definitely the way for me. Going in and figuring out how can I get someone to believe in what I believe in and put the backing behind me to do this work independently. And that's how it's happened so far.
Wow. Well, thank you. And now we'll hear from Ayesha.
Hi, everyone, and thank you so much for having me here. I'm really honored to be a part of this wonderful group. I had a somewhat circuitous route into my present position. I actually studied international affairs, and I was going to, go to South Asia and work in rural, development. And that was sidetracked because I got married and had a child, and I didn't see myself dragging my kid all around the globe. And so made a sort of left turn into publishing and worked for a number of different publishing houses, including several of what we now call the Big Five. And I think after a number of years, I realized that my tastes and sensibilities were never going to align with mainstream publishing. As an immigrant and a biracial woman, I always felt that the tastes that were prevalent in publishing were not what I was looking for. I was looking for stories that somehow explicated the experience of otherness, that I have always in some ways carried with me in this country. And that was ultimately what drove me to become an agent, because there wasn't my decisions to take on certain projects or certain authors weren't going to be questioned by the powers that be. And I could just follow my own passions and interests. And over the years of being an agent, it's become somewhat of a mission for me, as this country is plunging into darkness, and I feel like voices like ours, voices that somehow are writing about what it means to be not part of the mainstream, is almost like an act of resistance. And so I feel like these are the kinds of voices that I want to help bring into the world.
And can you talk briefly about just the decision to start your own agency? Like, how did that come about?
Well, after I left my last editorial position, I was briefly in a partnership with another agent, and it was sort of like a bad marriage. And so, you know, after that, I jumped to another agency, and that agency closed down 7 months after I joined. And I decided, as hard as it might be, I would rather just work for myself and be completely self-reliant than have to put myself into those kinds of situations. And it was both the hardest and also the very best choice I've ever made.
Wow, wow. Well, hopefully we'll get to dig in a little bit more. Um, so the next question is for our writers on the panel, in terms of just how did you know you had a book idea? How did you, pitch the manuscript? How did you put together your proposal? So just kind of those nuts and bolts of, here's my idea, here's how I'm going to get it out, to try to get a deal. So let's start with Vanessa.
So I think it has to do with your obsessions and the things that you're most curious about. And even though each of my 3 books, To See Other Possibilities, River of Stars, Forbidden City, are all very different sort of like setting, the concerns, you keep circling back around the things that you're interested in, right? Resistance, freedom, tradition. And so for me, it just, you have to think about what's going to carry you through a lot of uncertainty, a lot of ups and downs, like, what it is that you can't let go of. That again, Forbidden City is like, I just can't quit you, right? It was like, and that's about Chairman Mao's teenage lover, right? And I do think, and this is something I talk about with my students, being able to have sort of an elevator pitch or a log line to be able to describe your work is key, not only to sort of sell it to agents or to be able to talk about it when you're being interviewed, but even just understanding what your project is. Like that along the drafting process, you have to be able to describe what you're writing in 1 or 2 sentences. So say, Deceit and Other Possibilities, I say it's about model minorities behaving badly. And A River of Stars, it's about, it's a pregnant Chinese, Thelma and Louise. And so it's, you want something that gets at the work, like certainly you just want them to be able to say, tell me more, that paragraph of a query. Tell me more, the first 50 pages, tell me more, the entire manuscript. And I mean, that's, I had a book editor come in and speak to my class last semester, and he just said so much of the job, even editorially, or even as an author, it's all about sales. As much as we are hidden in our cubbyhole, writing away. And so, but I mean, I think just to answer your question, Blanca, it's just like something that there's going to be so much standing in your way. Your friends and family who love you, society at large not appreciating the arts. It has to be something that you can't quit. So.
Thank you. And Saw, what was your process to actually getting that book deal, or saying like, okay, here's the idea that's going to be the book?
Yeah, I think that my process was actually a little bit different, right? I don't know how often this happens, but I originally I was sort of thinking about a memoir, and I remember talking to my editor at the time about this idea, like, oh, I'm not sure, but I think it would be amazing. I think it would be great. And then we talked about, really thinking about mass incarceration and all the sort of, tentacles it has. And it's like, there's so much to say. There's so many different sort of, ways so many different directions, right? So it's really a matter of, after writing the first piece, having the editor. So at the time, Nation Institute was connected to The Nation and to Nation Books. So being at the Institute and being a fellow there, it was very easy for the book side to kind of see the stories. And I had already been in conversation about the possible memoir. And when the story actually came out, I was like, you know, what about nonfiction? Like, what about a book that really, you know, lets you go wild essentially with this issue? And I was like, yeah, right. Like that makes so much sense. And it really just made me think about all the different directions I wanted to go in, all the different stories I wanted to tell. I mean, in the end, I couldn't tell all of them, but it was really having the interest already from a publishing house, right? Having a publisher come to me and say, yeah, we want to, you know, we want to give you a book deal. We want you to write a book. And I'm like, oh, what? Really? Cool. And then it was like, well, maybe I should get an agent. And I had been working with one agent for a while and it wasn't the right fit. And the publisher, even at the time, was like, I'll give you a list of agents, you know, non-biased, right? It's like, here's some great ones that I think would be good fits. And I went through the list and I saw one of the agents that was sort of my dream agent that, you know, when I was in college, I remember emailing her and like never hearing back. And I was like, oh my God, like what? Tanya McKinnon, yes. And so I, you know, sent her an email and she was already expecting my email. So I had like an introduction, right? So I think that really sort of paved the way. Now, obviously, you don't just get an introduction if you don't have the material, right? So I did have the story, I did have a book, I did have that proposal that, you know, had already caught the eye of one publisher. So if it's caught the eye of one publisher, the likelihood is that it could catch the eye of other publishers. So once I had an agent, it was like, all right, let's decide what we want to do, where we want to go, where do we want this book to live? And that's essentially sort of how I got, you know, in. But I do think that if you don't already have that happening, that, you know, the query letter is still queen, right? And it needs to be nuanced, it needs to be powerful, it needs to have a very distinct voice on top of that story. So I think that anytime you're able to send a query letter that, you know, gets either the agent or the agent's assistant, whoever is reading the email, to say, whoa, I want to know more. I think that that's just key, like always being able to say, this is the story, this is why you should care, and this is why you need to know more. So the query letter, I think, is still queen. And obviously, if you have somebody that can make an introduction to a publisher or to an agent, yeah, you can't pass that up. So I think that I got pretty lucky with that.
Okay, well, thank you. So now we want to hear from the agents. On your side, how do you go about choosing your clients that you're going to work with? Is the query letter still queen? Or, you know, what should be in that query letter? What's the, maybe if you can think of an elevator pitch that really grabbed you. So let's start with Ayesha. What advice would you give people as far as landing an agent?
Well, I have to reiterate what Sa said, that, you know, an introduction of some sort, you know, is hugely influential in an industry that is very relationship driven. You know, it's very cliquish, and people automatically put more weight on, you know, a referral from somebody in the industry that they know. And I mean, it is about who you know, but it's also like it's already been filtered. You know, somebody who knows what they're doing, you know, like an editor in a magazine, or an editor in a publishing house passing something along, or in my case also my other clients. You know, they've by them giving it a stamp of approval, you know, that feels meaningful. Which is why I think, you know, it's so important as an aspiring author to be in these communities, you know, so that you do have, you know, those resources and the ability to have to call on other folk, you know, to try and help you make those kinds of introductions. But it isn't the only path by any stretch of the imagination. There is, you know, very much a good query letter backed up by really excellent sample material, you know, will definitely always catch my attention.
Jade, can you add to that?
Yeah, absolutely. I second everything Ayesha said. I do think that where I am in my career, my sort of clients come from a mix of referrals from editors or other people, or my colleagues even who are passing along material, outreach that I'm doing from sort of seeing people who are writing really interesting sort of long form articles or short stories online. But the last project I sold came straight from the query box from someone I didn't know. So that does happen as well. And it's an important part of how I go through submissions. Just to talk a little bit more about the query letter itself, and I could go on and on about this, so I'll try to keep it short. But for me, I think the best query letters, as I think Vanessa said, have a really clear sense of both what they are about and why they are going to be interesting to someone who doesn't know who the author is. And a query letter will catch my eye when it feels like it has a clear sense of voice and knows both of those things, and is also pretty concise. It is a writing sample as well. The other thing that I really turn to is the sample that comes with the queries. So some agents just want a query letter, but a lot of them will ask for the first couple pages of your manuscript or your proposal. And honestly, that is the sort of main thing that I base my request decision on, because if someone has a voice or a sense of how to start a story, it will show up there. And so that's something that I always advise writers really pay attention to and really make sure they have run by other people before they send something in, because it really is so important to just grab our attention in that way.
And would you say that you have more solicitations than you could possibly take on, as in people that you would want to work with but just can't? Like, are you at capacity? What is capacity for an agent? Could each of you take a stab at that? Ayesha, let's start with you.
I'm still taking on clients. I obviously not as many as earlier on in my career, and I'm a little bit more discerning simply because I know better, which projects I can actually really make a difference in and contribute to. And there are lots and lots of really meritorious projects out there that simply, are not within my bailiwick, or that I don't have a lot of expertise in. And so I think the lanes from which I pick are also just a little bit narrower. But yes, I'm still taking on clients, maybe 2 or 3 a year.
I am building my client list at the moment, so I'm very much looking for new projects. I'm fishing a lot right now at the beginning of this year, because I have a couple things in the pipeline that are a ways off, and I would love some new material to work on. So just putting that out there into the universe. But yeah, so I would say I'm very actively acquiring. The the main criteria for me, especially with projects that I do admire, is very specifically, do I think that I have a vision for how to work on them? Sometimes projects come in that I think are great, but I just don't have the vision for where to send it or what to do with it. And that's usually what stops me from working on projects that I would read and enjoy as a reader. So yeah, but generally I'm very much not at capacity, and still hoping to grow and still hoping to sign quite a few more clients over the next couple of years.
Okay, great. Well, we'd like to also talk a little bit about just the logistical side of writing a book from a financial perspective, because it, sounds glamorous to stay up at night and write your amazing novel, but how do you pay your bills at the same time, and manage all the other things in your life? So, Saw, why don't we start with you? Can you tell us about just how you have sustained your writing career?
Yeah, good question. I would say obviously, well, maybe not obviously, because I've learned that this is not obvious and it doesn't always happen. but the advance for the book, right? So for me, having a book advance was something that was really important for me to sustain the year of actually working on the book, right? So how do you do this reporting? How do you do this traveling? How do you do everything you need to do to actually get the book, you know, to get it where it needs to be? So for me, that was obviously having the funds from the advance, but also applying to, again, fellowships, right? So there were a lot of fellowships that were sort of out there if you were trying to complete a book, if you were trying to, just something to sort of take you home. So that was a big part of it for me, mostly writing. Also, just if there was some way to find time to write on the side, right? What can you write in addition to writing the book, which is a lot of work. But yeah, I would say for me that it was really just having the funding from the advance and having additional funding come later in the form of fellowships from different places to sort of, get me over.
Okay, great. Vanessa.
So to add to what Saw was saying, like fellowships are key, and the advance as well, but just something to note, people may or may not know that the advance is split into 4 parts. So upon signing, upon delivery, at paperback, and then a year after that. So, and then I actually heard that some of them are being spreading it out over like a 5th part, or like there's always like the publisher's always trying to push back and like amortize the payment over a longer period of time. So so given all that, I think it's also important to make the most use of the material that you have. And I call this sort of the roast chicken system. So that first day, whether or not you're vegetarian or vegan, that first day you roast a chicken, the second day you pick it apart for sandwiches, the third day you boil it for stock. And in that same way, as I'm writing my books, even if it's fiction, I'm doing research along the way, I'll be able to pull out reported narrative essays. So, you just make, approach the material in different ways, and you can sort of sell it that way. It's also, for me, I teach both at summer conferences and, at, universities, and you need something that sort of will, keep you in the literary world, and, I love working with students and being engaged in that way. And you just also need to consider take stock of, it can be very tempting to say yes to anything that comes your way, but realizing like what time you have, where you should be devoting the best part of yourself, and like figuring out like what's the highest paid work that you can do that doesn't detract from the part of you that needs to, to be able to finish that book. So, I will also add, it does help if you have shared expenses, whether that's roommates or a partner. Like that's just the reality. Like someone has to have, healthcare in the household, and so that's also a part of it.
Actually, I just want to add quickly, and I don't know if this is just a part of the negotiation, but my agent was able to get my contract so that it was top heavy. I'm like, yeah, give me more of the money up front to get this thing moving in order to make it happen. So I know the idea of it being sort of spread over a longer period of time. And my book didn't take that long. So I think it was about 16 months from reporting to end, but it was really a matter of, okay, how much do we get up front? You know what I mean? So that I can make sure that that is enough to sustain me. And I guess maybe there are some savings, right? I'm thinking like, was I dipping into my savings? And because it was my first book, I didn't have, all these other sort of ways, as Vanessa mentioned, to roast the chicken. And I think now that I've written a book, it's just like all kind of ways, right? So now I'm doing speaking engagements. I'm talking to, students at universities. I'm being called into, corporate America to give talks. So it's really just a matter of once you've done the first book, then it makes it significantly easier. So keep that in mind too. The first book,
there's also speaking agents out there who can help you land those, which they can be lucrative. So
yeah, I have a speaking agent too. So that you got to have an agent for everything almost now, guys.
Well, I want to make sure we touch on something that Ayesha, you've mentioned a few times, which is the importance of relationships. And when we were prepping for this, I mentioned that I went through an MFA program, and remember people saying, well, why aren't my professors helping me? Or I took this, or I cold called my favorite author, and why aren't they helping me? So can you talk a little bit about, like, okay, realistically, how do you build authentic relationships in the literary world? So we'll start with you, Ayesha.
The way that I see it is, that you truly support other authors, who are aspiring. Maybe they're a little behind you, maybe they're a little bit ahead of you, but there's a sort of a genuine attempt to help them reach their own literary goals. And that may mean when they're promoting their book, to do a bookstore event with them, or to write a blurb for them, or to even just post on the publication of their book on social media, how excited you are, to give it a little bit, to amplify it a little bit and give it a little bit of a boost. But even before that, reading each other's work, commenting on each other, and providing introductions, helping others to go through the door that you may already have gone through. I think that's hugely important. And I think that's what it means to be a literary citizen, a good literary citizen.
Jade, do you want to add anything to that?
Yeah, I think what Ayesha said was exactly right. As she said, it is a very relationships-based industry, and there's a way in which I do think that can become very transactional, and that's why I often caution writers to, when you're thinking about building relationships, it's not just about like, oh, if I, meet this author, then they can introduce me to this person, or they, owe me this blurb or anything like that. I think that community is really important also, because writing is a very solitary and very opaque practice when you sort of start running up against book publishing. And it helps to have people in your corner, not just so that you sort of have support when your own turn comes around, but also so that you have people to commiserate. This is true in book publishing as well. People to commiserate with, people to ask questions when you're not totally sure about something, right? And to sort of develop those friendships and those relationships. And as Ayesha said, to sort of pay it forward for things that aren't necessarily not just because you'll think they'll like benefit you personally, but because you're really, you want to support other writers' work. You want to be in community to sort of, again, what's that phrase, like sending the elevator back down for people who maybe aren't where you are yet. And sort of giving them the opportunity and giving them the same opportunities that people gave you when you were just starting out, I think is really, really important.
Great. And we will be moving to Q&A very soon. There was another question that we wanted to get to, which is just how do you sort of measure success of a book or a first book? Is it just by metrics, sales? So let's start with the authors. Like, how do you sort of gauge, your own books, I guess, if you can divulge that. So Vanessa, let's start with you.
Well, I think at base, does it do well enough that I can continue to keep writing books? So that's really important to me. But also just, I've had so many wonderful interactions with strangers who have told me, like, I felt seen, I felt made visible, I felt inspired to do my own work, to tell the story that is not out there, to write the book that they would have wanted when they were growing up. So to me, that's success. And I just wanted to add a little bit to the notion of community, and like that way that we can show up for each other. People might be wondering, like, how do you do that? Do you just sort of sidle up to someone and say, like, hey, let's go be writers together? And so I think I was like peeking over at the guest list, and I see there's a number of people from the Writers Grotto in San Francisco. There's writing communities all over the US. But like for Forbidden City, which the cover features like a peasant girl in like 2 braids. Like there was a whole braid brigade. They surprised me. It was a flash mob. They showed up at my launch, like 30 people with their hair done in 2 braids. So I think it's truly wonderful. Like people show up for you if you've shown up for them, and it's not quid pro quo. And to me, that's also part of its success. Like knowing that you have been of service and helpful, and that you sent that out into the universe, and it comes back to you when your book comes out.
Saw, anything to add as far as measuring
Ooh.
success?
I think that, Vanessa's written a number of books, and this is my first book. So, and it also came at a really sort of bad time. I'm always like, my baby was born in a bad time. So my book literally came out right at the beginning of the pandemic. So I think the first sort of idea of success was that, hey, I had a budget for marketing, right? I was slated to go to 10 cities. So I had a book tour that was going to be in 10 cities. I had all these media appearances. I'm like, oh my God, people care about this work. They care about me. They care about the book, la, la, la. So that for me felt like success. It didn't end up happening because the pandemic came, everything was shut down, and we had to just really figure out how to do this. Like, how do you move on and create something completely different, right? So I think when bookstores were trying to figure out, how do they even go online? What does it look like to have a talk virtually versus in person? All these different things that were sort of happening that, were really huge setbacks, right? And once I started doing more virtual talks, I think that that's where I was just like, yeah, people do care about this, right? And then I would get emails from people. I would get direct messages from people saying that, oh, a woman doesn't even live in this country is telling me that her husband that's in prison heard me on NPR and told her about my book. And I was like, what? That's cool, right? Or getting, professors emailing me saying that they're using my book in their classrooms. I feel like I was looking up something recently about like legislative change around children of incarcerated parents, like whatever the topic was. And I remember scrolling to the bottom, and I was cited. I'm like, what? So it's all these things that are happening and you're just not even aware, right? So you're having your book used in universities, you're having, people all over the world read it and send you notes, right? So it's really a matter of just thinking, how many people did you move, or is it how you move those people? So I find that, all of those are different measures of success, right? And because, again, my book tour was canceled, everything sort of shifted, I think success looked a bit different for me. And it came a bit later, right? So one thing I'm seeing now is I'll get unsolicited sort of requests for speaking, like the speaking fees are fantastic too. So I'm like, oh, this is success, right? Like this is what it should be, so on top of being asked to come and speak, it's like, hey, we're also going to buy 200 to 500 books. I'm like, all right, now that's what I like to hear. So I'm still sort of, moving and looking at all the different ways success can sort of manifest.
So before we move on, Jade and Ayesha, is there anything you would add to that as far as just metrics that you're looking at to measure success?
From my perspective, writing is a long game, and so I don't look at any one particular project having to meet certain standards of success. It's more, is the project that is your first project going to help you work toward your second project? And as Vanessa said, are you going to be able to keep publishing? So one of the things that I very much do is make sure that I understand what my client's goal is for their writing career, and where do they see themselves in 10 years? And then we can look at this particular project and say, how is this going to move you a little bit closer to that goal? And usually it's not so much the size of the advance or well, how many copies of the books are sold is certainly somewhat important, but a little bit less so than, has this, established you, in your sort of area of interest or expertise, has it given you, certain media exposure, has it opened other doors and other opportunities for you? Are you, as Sa now being invited to places, which brings you around into other circles and other places, that will make your life a little bit easier. So the idea is to focus on the entire length of your career and not this any one particular book, and that particular book has to accomplish all of these metrics, or you're a failure. It never is that way.
Yeah, I agree with that. And I just want to add that there are, on the individual project level, there are just too many factors that are outside of our control, like global pandemics, for example. And so I think that's why it's so important to maintain that sort of macro level view of what you would like your project to do, but also what you would like as a writer to do in the future. Because I just think it goes so much further beyond how much any one book sells or whether it hits this list or that list.
I just want to say thank you, Jade and Ayesha, for saying that, because I feel like when I was told that you have to write more books, I was like, what? You mean this one book isn't going to like change my whole life and make me famous? They're like, no, like you have to write multiple books. This is like the long gas, like, oh, wow. So I gotta get on to book 2.
Yes, we're looking forward to book 2. So I'm seeing tons of questions coming in and lots of activity in the chat, which I can't see all of it. So I'm going to just try to get through some of the audience questions. One is, what advice do you have if you've been out on submission for a year with your very established agent and it has not ended in a book deal? My agent and I amicably parted ways. So the agent apparently felt like she couldn't send it out to any more places. So just curious, Ayesha and Jade, maybe we'll start with you, Ayesha, just, this situation where maybe the book is not getting picked up, any advice for this writer?
I think that it depends on a number of different things, including, what the project is and how widely it's being sent out. It definitely makes it more difficult if it has already been submitted extensively. The rule in publishing is you can't submit to another editor in the same house. If one editor in one house passes, that's pretty much it, unless that editor has left, or the editor specifically agrees, for you to send it to somebody else in that house. So it definitely has narrowed the avenues. But depending, there's a couple of different things one can do. One can rework the proposal slightly, to give it a new twist or a new direction. One can repitch it in a different way. And one can go back to some of those same editors and say, it's different now. Would you be interested in taking another look? Or one can put that project in a drawer, focus on the next one, and then, like Vanessa, publish that one after a few years have gone by.
Okay. Jade, do you have any other thoughts?
I have nothing to add. I agree with all of that.
Okay, great.
Yeah, just to explain, sometimes if your book can't sell, it means you have to write another book. But it's not over till it's over. As I said, I started Forbidden City in 2007, and it was published in 2022. And I'm fully convinced that despite all the twists and turns, I needed that time in the end to make it the best book that it could be. I'm at peace with that. I needed to become the writer I became writing those other books before I could return to the manuscript. And Oh, I did want to say, like, even one other option is if you're parting ways with your agent, you could try to get another one, or you could see if there are small presses that, you know, university presses that deal with nonfiction, or another small press that might be to your aesthetic, that you could approach it that way as well.
Thank you. That was very helpful. And there's been a lot of questions about social media and having a platform as a writer, you know, before you get a book deal. So let's hear from Jade. Do you have any thoughts on this? Just how important is it to sort of have a presence online, or what kind of presence? Like, what do you think matters?
Yeah, I get this question a lot, I think because it stresses writers out a lot. And what I generally say is that, like, it depends. If you are writing into nonfiction, platform is important. I'm not going to pretend that it's not related. Platform in nonfiction, I think, can mean a couple different things, right? Like, it could mean a social media following, but it could also just mean that you can demonstrate expertise in some way about the subject that you're writing on, right? Like, you need to prove that if you are really sort of proposing a book that's going to research a particular topic very well, that you have the background and the contacts and the sort of and the grounding that you need to go forward, as well as knowing other people who sort of work or have written books in that area, and that you kind of have that network and those connections. For fiction, again, like, it can be helpful, but I do think it's much more about the manuscript itself. I also think that, you know, in terms of looking at social media specifically, it can be something that sort of disproportionately authors sort of dedicate a lot of time to and get very stressed out about. And I think that, you know, as nice as it can be, the link between, like, Twitter followers and sales of your book is not by any means a particularly linear thing. And so my general advice for social media usage is, you know, if it is something, it's a good way of building community. It's a good way of getting in touch with other writers. If social media is something that you enjoy using and you feel that you are able to post without going into an anxiety spiral, and if you are also willing to sort of engage with other people, have conversations, boost other people's posts, right? Like, not just self-promotional things, then that can be a really useful tool for you. If social media is something that you emerge from wanting to die, then it is not worth your mental health and stress levels to do. And again, like, it is, there's no cardinal rule that says, like, you need to have X number of followers before an agent will even look at your book. Like, there's nothing like that. There are so many ways to go about this. And I think that everyone, you know, should choose what fits them, and if it's sort of what they're writing into and what fits their mental health needs, frankly.
Ayesha, anything to add to that as far as just, like, platform being, you know, a crucial thing to have to get noticed, I guess, by the publishing world?
Yeah, I agree with everything that Jade said. You know, and I think when we just all have to keep in mind that platform takes, you know, has many different aspects to it, and, you know, but I think it is a very good idea to think relatively early on. You know, once you've sort of finished working on your project, whether it's a manuscript or your nonfiction book proposal, like, what are the ways in which you will be able to contribute toward the promotion of the book? Because, you know, publishers are going to require that from you, and they do it more and more. And whether that is because you already are on the lecture circuit, or, you know, that you have, you know, a podcast or a column, or, you know, you post regular videos or something like that, you know, I think it will be a good thing to start thinking about that, and also to very sort of intentionally and deliberately go about, you know, building that, you know, so that when you go to a publisher, you can say, these are the ways in which I can help you reach your audience.
Great, thank you. So here's a question that I think I'll direct to Vanessa. It's kind of also along the lines of finances and sustaining your career. You know, when you are starting off and not sure if your writing career will sustain you financially, did you also work on progressing your employee job career at the same time? Or do you really need to focus on your writing career and can't do both? So, can you have a full-time job and write a book? I guess is the question. What are your thoughts, Vanessa?
Yeah, I mean, I definitely know people who have. I remember talking to an author who said she just didn't go out for a year and a half. Like no birthdays, no drinks, no exercise. Like she would only go out to see you if it was your like 21st birthday or 40th birthday or like a big birthday. So, I mean, the fact of the matter is there's only enough time in the day. So you have to think about like, if you're working on, at the time I was, when I was a full-time journalist, I was doing what I could like, but journalism is a very demanding job. You're like always getting calls at all hours about questions, like running around to meet sources. And so you have to just think about like, what is it you need that, what is it, how can you fulfill yourself professionally, but still leave enough in the tank for the creative work. And so it is possible, but then something else has to give, right? Like, is it your family? Is it your health? Is it, something? And so you have to figure out, you can go hard at both for a while, but eventually, once you've established and, built up your savings and all that, you may decide that like you want to focus more on writing or leave that staff job. But I will say there's no one way of being a writer. There's like writers who are lawyers or doctors or, work in nonprofits. So like, you just have to figure out like what in your life is going to be able to balance all these different projects and parts of yourself.
Well, great. Thank you. That is like the challenge for so many people. I know it's been a challenge for me because I work full time and have tried to pursue my creative projects on the side. And yeah, it's just hard. I don't have an answer. Maybe if we do this panel in a year, I'll have a better answer. There is a specific question for Ayesha. So many of us admire Ibram X. Kendi's work. How did you start working with him? And is there anything we can learn from his success?
Well, one thing I found out I received a query from Ibram, and one thing I found out actually from a profile of his in GQ after he had won the National Book Award and after his second book blew up, is that I was the 50th agent that he queried. So I was.
Wait, so he queried you?
He queried me, yes.
Oh, wow.
He was a young university professor. This was more than 10 years ago. And he had actually written one academic book. And so he had this idea for, a book that ended up being stamped from the beginning. And so I was the 50th one. And I don't know whether to feel insulted or happy that he even queried me at all, but I definitely saw something in the project, and we worked together for quite a long time on the proposal. One thing that really helped was that he also had a journalism background, and so he was not yet sort of infected by the kind of jargony writing that's frequently common in academia, and he really knew how to write in a very narrative way, and so it was relatively easy to guide him. And we sent it out, and there was actually his book was also, it was published by Nation Books, and right around the time that it was under contract, Nation was part of Perseus, and that was acquired by Hachette. So there was a lot of stuff that was happening, after the acquisition, but before it was acquired, the only offers we got were from small independent presses. And, this is, especially when it comes to books that are, not mainstream, or that deal with, with issues of basically racism in America. it just, or underrepresented, authors who are underrepresented in publishing, it's just a harder lift. It's a heavier lift. And so it's not, to me, it wasn't particularly surprising that none of the mainstream publishers, jumped on that particular book. But thank God we got the offer from Nation Books. And then once, he won this giant award, that obviously opened a lot of doors for him.
Wow. So it feels like authors are always coming to agents, right? But is it also competitive for agents to try to get certain authors, or what's that dynamic like?
Yeah, it feels increasingly rare to me that I want something and no other agent has seen the same thing or same potential, and that is called a beauty contest, and they are very, I'm sure, like, fun if very stressful for the author, just very stressful for me. But yeah, I mean, I think something Ayesha has spoken to is that there are so many different ways to be represented by your agent, to have that process happen. Maybe an agent reaches out to you early and they're, one of the only people you talk to. Maybe you send queries and only one person wants the project. Maybe you send queries and multiple agents want the project, and suddenly they're all competing for representation. I think there are just, there are so many unique situations so many unique ways this can come about.
And we're getting close to time, but I wanted to also touch on just what can agents or authors expect as far as like working with an agent, working with an editor, or publishing house. So Sa, can you talk a little bit about your experience? Like, the way your book turned out, was that, kind of a team effort, I guess? Or was it, like someone said earlier, like, writing is a very solitary practice. So did it feel like you had to do all the work yourself, or were you getting help in terms of developing the book?
Oh, that's good. Help in terms of developing the book. Well, I think that once you have the proposal submitted and they're like, hey, we like this proposal, I feel like you're just at that point, then you just write the book, right? Then you do the reporting, because in my proposal specifically, you have it laid out where you have chapter by chapter. This is who I plan to speak to. This is what I want to represent. This is the city I'm going to be in. So I found that, it was really just a matter of doing what I laid out to do, but also, having support along that journey, right? So if I'm in rural Kentucky and I'm like trying to figure out how to get mothers that have dealt with, addiction to opioid to actually talk to me, like, all right, what advice do you have? How do I get in? What do I say? What are some of the tricks of the trade to sort of, help you along the way? And I found that, that's when the editor is going to be there. He's like, yeah, so tired. And like, nobody's responding. And they're kind of encouraging you, pushing you on. And I'll say in general for working with my agent, I feel like completely changed everything for me, right? I was with someone for a year. We were trying to figure out what to do with the book. It's like we couldn't quite figure it out. And I was like, oh my God, like so much time is going by. And this is a really successful agent, right? But it just wasn't a good fit. And the first conversation I had with my agent, I forget what she said. It was almost something like, why can't you write about people nobody give a shit about? I was like, yes. And then she just started asking me all these questions. And just from those questions, I was able to put the sort of missing nut graph into my proposal. And then that was it, So I feel like once you meet the right person that kind of sees you, sees your perspective, see what it is you can do with what you believe, the reporting is just, I felt like that was everything. And once I had that, I was like, I just want to go now, right? So I'm in Jackson, Mississippi. I'm in Miami, Florida. I'm in, Louisville, and then rural Kentucky. So really just being out there and just doing the work once I've gotten, once I've had the proposal laid out. Like once you have it laid out, that's it. So once you get to editing, then it's like, oh, maybe we can say this in a different way, or can you go deeper here? Can you, add this, or what do you really feel about that? Is there another way that you can express this? I'm like, okay, that's what you're doing. You want me to go deeper? and that I found to be helpful from my editor.
Great, great. Well, let's do quick lightning round with the other panelists before we wrap up here. Just one last thought from that maybe we haven't touched on. Ayesha, do you want to go first?
I'm not sure if there's anything that we haven't particularly touched on. I would just say to keep in mind that, there are many routes to, a book, and many routes to getting published, and to, really focus on, the thing that is, like most important to you in terms of your passions and your interests. I'm sorry, I'm not articulating this particularly well, but it just feels like you shouldn't write a book just for the sake of writing a book because it will, it will further your career. You should write a book because it's something that you really believe in, and you really feel it needs to be out there in the world. Because it's extremely hard. It's extremely hard, not just getting an agent and getting a book contract, but it's extremely hard writing a book. And that transition from being a journalist and writing shorter form pieces to writing, 300 pages and all making sense and having a progression and a narrative and forward momentum and all of that is a whole other craft that you have to master. So it is, it has to be your passion that drives you forward. So just to keep that in mind. Sorry that was very convoluted.
No, thank you. So Vanessa and Jade, if you have a final thought, you can share in like 20 seconds. Let's Vanessa.
Yeah, I mean, just protect your creative self. Make sure, again, that you're putting the best part of yourself in the work that matters most to you. There's an exercise from Felicia Rose Chavez's How to Anti-Racist Workshop, where she talks about like, write a list of the places and times where you're inspired, the places and times when you're not. And at least temporarily, are there ways you can remove the things that are stymieing you for like a month, 2 months, 3 months, and try to map that out. And I think as hard as it is, as much as university feels like it's just trying to shit on you, like you can find a way through.
Thank you.
The only point that I always like to add is writers, before you query an agent, please have other people read your book. Have a group of readers that you trust, share your samples with them, get feedback. I do not want to be the first person to ever lay eyes on a draft of what you have written. If you are querying me, it is so helpful to get feedback from other people. This is why writing groups are great. Please have other people read your work.
Fantastic. Well, there were so many questions. I'm sorry for the questions that we weren't able to get to. Hopefully we can do some of that in the chat before people log off. But thank you to Sylvia A. Harvey, known as Sa, Vanessa Wah, Jade Wong-Baxter, and Ayesha Pande. Thank you all so much. This was such a great conversation. I've learned so much, and I'm sure everyone's feeling inspired now to go work on some query letters and learn to sell ourselves and form community. And so thank you all, and have a great weekend.
Thank you so much, Blanca. I just want to add my thanks to our amazing panelists. This was a ton of information and candor and support in just a few short minutes. I want to remind everyone the Institute for Independent Journalists is having a webinar on trauma-informed journalism on Friday, February 10th. So both reporting, writing, and sort of ethical standards we want to follow. And then our big annual conference is March 9th and 10th. So please join us then. We'll also be putting a replay of this webinar in the newsletter on Tuesday. I'll try to capture as much of the amazing chat that we had to put in that as well. And most importantly, I'm going to put a link to Slack, our Slack channel. So please do join the Slack. That can be a place where people can compare notes. We had so many questions. I think we had 40 questions and lots more in the chat. So I know there's so much more appetite, and I will be in there. I'll be happy to answer what I can and share more resources. But thank you again so much, Vanessa, Ayesha, Jade, Blanca, and Sa. I appreciate you so much. I am feeling inspired maybe to write that second book. And thank you again to everyone for being here with us on a Friday when you could have been doing many other things. Happy Year of the Rabbit for those who are celebrating the Lunar New Year this weekend. And thank you again to our panelists.
Thanks everybody for coming out.